think we should move on to our buys because it's a longer list.
It is, yeah.
It is a longer list. The name I want to throw out first and foremost is Amari Cooper.
Oh.
I'm on the clock and it's Amari.
Yep. Very well.
Amari Cooper, he had an okay week against Tennessee. The targets were there. He was like one play away from having a monster week. Carr just slightly overthrew him on what would have been like a 50-yard touchdown. So if you would have added that to his 6.2 points, and he would have been like a wide receiver 1 last week. Just missed. The opportunity is there, but if you look through 3 games, I mean, he had a big week 1 against New Orleans, and that was on yardage alone. Last week, it was okay, right?
Well, he saw a lot of Trufant, didn't he?
Yeah, he saw a lot of Trufant. He made this ridiculous catch where he like levitated in the air, but it wasn't great. He's been around like 6 to 8 points the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So his numbers have been slightly down. I don't think for a minute that this will continue. He has 0 touchdowns on the year. That won't continue. He is still being heavily targeted. He has the same amount of targets as like Odell Beckham. He has Allen Robinson is in this range. He has more targets than DeAndre Hopkins. He has more targets than Brandon Marshall. So his usage is not a concern, and that's when you want to try to jump on a player that's had a couple of down weeks. Nothing's really changed with his usage, but his numbers haven't quite been there. This week, I think he will probably return to the 10-plus point range against Baltimore. So I would go out and buy Amari Cooper right now if you can. It might cost a pretty penny still to get Amari Cooper because he still has that name value, but I think it will be cheaper than what it normally would be. Certainly later on in the season, if you start scoring touchdowns, he'll probably be untouchable. So now's the time to go out and try to make an offer. I mean, maybe you're deep in a certain position. You can offer Amari Cooper. Maybe you have somebody who has a huge name, but you want to get rid of. Like, say you had Gronk on your team. And yeah, you probably want to hold out until Brady comes back to see if Gronk can put up, his 20-point weeks like he normally does. But the thing with the tight end position this year is it's been kind of all over the place, right? And who's to say that it won't continue with Gronk? And what advantage would you really have, or what disadvantage should I say? If you trade Gronk for depth in another position, you go with somebody like, I don't know, Eric Ebron. And most times you'll probably still be winning the tight end battle. So would you trade Gronk for Amari Cooper?
That's a tough one, only because, Gronk's name, in theory, commands a lot of value. But as we've seen in like one of our own leagues, it hasn't really been the case. I might do it just because, Amari Cooper's a touchdown away from everyone being like, oh, right, he's a wide receiver 1. He's like right on the edge of that, which is why, you kind of got to buy him now before they come. I guess I'd do that. The thing with Gronk that has kept me from making any offers on him through all these injuries is that he doesn't really give the team that has him that much of an advantage because let's say you don't own Gronk. Well, you're only going to face the Gronk owner once during the regular season, maybe twice. And maybe during playoffs. But if they need to have a great team other than Gronk for that to really matter, Gronk's not going to be the reason they win their week on his own. He helps. That's not it. So not owning Gronk actually doesn't hurt you that much because the rest of the tight end market is just so up and down. So I don't really. Yeah, I'd probably do that. Depending on my wide receiver situation. If I was like, oh man, I had Keenan or Sammy or Dez, and I'm like, oh, I'm kind of thin now. Yeah, I'd probably do that.
Well, that begs the question then, should you be selling? We didn't talk about him in the sell portion, but would you sell Gronk for additional depth throughout the rest of your lineup? Or like an elite player at a different position because of his name?
Probably not yet. The only reason I wouldn't say Gronk isn't a sell yet is because he hasn't done anything. Like his name is worth
played, yeah.
Yeah, like maybe after he has one big game, it's like, look, Gronk is back. Then I might consider selling him because he has, he's been kind of injury prone throughout his career. So I think I'd probably hold Gronk just until his value spikes again.
Okay. Fair enough. Let's move on, but buy Amari Cooper if you can.
Yeah.
Next is another elite wide receiver, Brandon Marshall.
Oh.
The thing with Brandon Marshall is he has this like lingering knee issue, something to keep an eye on. But news broke today, we didn't talk about this in the news section, that the Jets are extremely concerned with Decker's shoulder.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it might be a long-term thing. Like he's going to get an MRI, I think, like now, tomorrow, maybe somewhere around that time frame. So keep an eye out for news on Eric Decker, because if he's out, then it's going to be a lot of Brandon Marshall. And Brandon Marshall hasn't really had that week yet. I mean, he had a down week 1. He had an okay week 2 just because he went over 100 yards, but last week was pretty abysmal as well. The targets are still there with Brandon Marshall. He's still getting red zone targets. I mean, he has 27 targets on the year through 3 games, so that's almost, that's 9, 10 a game. Brandon Marshall, what do you think? What would you pay to get Brandon Marshall?
I definitely like the idea of buying him, especially with like the Decker news. Like they're talking about like, oh, the team's worried it might be something really serious. Like we might be like one news blur away from hearing Decker's missing half the season. Who knows? So you definitely got to buy him this week. Even with Seattle coming up, just the targets might be so much it doesn't matter. But I don't want to sell anything too much, just because with the lingering like knee issue and his like lack of production, you should be able to get him for like a pretty like wide receiver 2-ish price. Like running.
Well, actually, you bring up a good point, because he's going against Seattle this week.
Yeah.
Maybe he has another bad week, and then his value will decrease even further. Yeah. I mean, would you wait then till he plays Seattle?
I'd probably feel out the owner, see if they're like in full panic mode. I tend to, when I'm looking to like buy or sell a player, I kind of, even though I don't usually give the advice to do it myself, I like to do it a week early, sell them when they have a really good matchup, buy them when they have one more bad matchup, because you're more likely to be able to pull off the trade. Whereas if you're trying to buy Marshall buy Marshall next week, you might be like, oh, he has a good matchup this week, he's going to bounce back. Whereas the owner is probably like, oh, he's got Seattle this week. Oh, do I start him? They're probably worried about the headache of what to do with Brandon Marshall.
That's true. So that's a great point.
Yeah, so I could go either way. I'm probably poking the owner, being like, hey, will you take like, an RB2 type guy for him? And if the answer is no, if like, no, I'm going to wait, then, let him probably have a down week against Seattle and then revisit the conversation.
Well, I mean, if you want to use like our league for an example, the Brandon Marshall owner has an okay amount of wide receiver depth, but his running backs are David Johnson and Jay Ajayi. So if he has Jay Ajayi as his running back too, he definitely needs a running back.
Yeah.
So if you are in a similar situation, definitely look at the Brandon Marshall owner, look at his team makeup, and like you said, poke him a little bit and say, hey, will you take an RB2 for Brandon Marshall? And if you can afford to give up that RB2, you're not in like that situation where you're starting Jay Ajayi, then you can probably afford to give up a running back, maybe, if you have the depth. And to get an elite wide receiver like Brandon Marshall, who will rebound, assuming this knee thing isn't going to go on the entire season, which it probably
he practiced fully today,
played.
So he's in good shape to be fine.
Yeah, so I would definitely kick the tires on Brandon Marshall. You could use the narrative about, he's playing Seattle this week. You need to get rid of him.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind, exactly. Like, if they're, like maybe Charles Sims is someone, even though he's only filling in for a few weeks, he had a big statistical week, even though, like, I watched a lot of that game. He didn't look amazing, but the numbers were there. And, Doug Martin, we've seen this injury story with him before. It's a hammy thing. Does it linger? I would sell Charles Sims to Brandon Marshall. And I'd even go a little high. Would you do Tevin Coleman for Brandon Marshall?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I think that's more realistic, I think.
Yeah, definitely, especially after his three touchdown game.
Yeah.
I mean, with Doug Martin coming back probably after the bye, I would imagine. They put a 3-week timetable on his injury. with Sims, you'd probably have to package somebody else.
Yeah,
unless
sure.
the owner is so desperate, like they have to have a running back and they might take Sims. You might be able to twist the trade narrative, but you might have to be talking to somebody who's, uninformed a little bit, that doesn't know
fair.
that Martin's coming back. So I would package Sims with somebody to get Marshall, but Tevin Coleman is somebody I would do a 1-for-1 for, like in a heartbeat.
What about
Take my
Jeremy Hill for Brandon Marshall?
Yeah, I'd do it.
Yeah, I think that one is also, I think, probably realistic after his like big week 3. The schedule gets soft. Jeremy Hill isn't really a sell for me, but I think I would do it for Brandon Marshall.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of options there. I mean, the question I have for Doug Martin is, do you have to let it linger?
Yep, there we go. Cranberries.
There it is. Moving on.
Boom.
Woo.
Moving
Can't have an
on.
episode without the Cranberries. So we talked about 2 elite wide receivers. We might as well bring in another one.
Right.
And talk about AJ Green.
AJ Green. This one, it's, you're probably not going to be able to buy him realistically. The name is worth too much. He's already had one big week. So it's not like there's this thing of like, oh man, maybe it just isn't happening for him. So it's unlikely, but he's had 2 bad weeks in a row. So maybe the Green owner is frustrated. They think, oh, he's going to be up and down all year, which historically AJ Green kind of has been. But the reason why he's worth a buy this week is that as soon as, you'll be seeing this video on Thursday. So today, he plays Miami. And Byron Maxwell just made Terrell Pryor look like Randy Rice, which is Randy Moss plus Jerry Rice.
I want that guy on my team.
You want Randy Rice on your team?
Yeah, I want Randy Rice. What's his value? What can I get him for?
Yeah, so AJ Green's just gonna eat his soul. He's gonna feast on him, and so that's AJ Green's gonna bounce back. The owner's gonna be like, oh no, never mind, he's fine. So that's why it's kind of like just poke the owner, just see if he's frustrated, if he's hurting at running back depth, or AJ Green's his only viable wide receiver, then maybe you can give him 2 wide receivers for AJ Green.
Yeah, it could be possible. Again, this might be really late because if he just destroys the Miami secondary and Byron Maxwell, then it's probably not going to happen. We're just going to poke him, definitely.
Yeah. That we don't need to go much more than that one. It's just like poke the AJ Green owner, see how he feels. Maybe he's panicking.
Yeah. Next, we're going to shift positions to the running back.
Oh.
Let's look at an elite level running back.
Oh.
Probably win at the end of the first round this year. Maybe early second, which would have been fantastic value, by the way. But one, Lamar Miller. Yeah, well, obviously. You drafted him in the second round, right?
Obviously. Yeah, no, Lamar Miller. This is like kind of the same story as Amari Cooper. Just like the volume's there, the yardage is there, just the touchdowns aren't. But
touchdowns aren't. They're coming.
They're coming, yeah. And he hasn't been super efficient with his workload, which I guess is a little concerning. His yards per carry is floating around 3, which you don't love. But the volume is just it's so bountiful. It kind of doesn't matter. He's an RB1 off of volume alone, and as soon as he starts getting touchdowns, he'll jump up into that top 3, top 5 running back conversation.
The most I got, are what I really pulled away from that New England game, was that Lamar Miller is prepared to be the workhorse back and get 30 touches a game, and you can tell by the way he runs.
Yeah.
He is not a violent runner right now, which could speak to his inefficiency a little bit. He is not fighting for extra yards. And there were a couple of situations where he got the ball out in the flat and was about to take a hit and then just kind of fell on the ground. He didn't even want the contact.
Yeah.
I don't know if the coaches are telling him, look, you don't need to take any unnecessary hits. We don't need you out there battling for an extra yard or 2 if it's going to hurt you over the course of the season, because we plan on giving you 25 to 30 touches every game. That could be the case, and that would be encouraging for me, because right now he has a 10-point floor, which is very good.
Yeah, floor.
He hasn't scored a touchdown yet, because if you add some touchdowns to the mix, people will realize why they drafted him in the first round or the second round. And he kind of has that home run hitting potential as well. So he has a potential to rip off a 60, 70 yard touchdown to go on top of his volume as well. So he'll have some 20, 30 point weeks. They're coming.
Oh, yeah.
And to mix that in with a 10-point floor, and you're looking at an RB, top 5 RB the rest of the way. But yeah, the touchdowns haven't been there. You might as well poke around.
Yeah. The thing with Lamar Miller is, like poke the owner, but they play Tennessee this week, who are actually like a pretty good run defense. Hell, we saw him hold Latavius to like 3.7 yards per carry, whatever it was.
They held Adrian Peterson to like 1 yard a carry.
A carry away from knee explosion, Adrian Peterson.
Yeah.
So it's actually like a pretty good run defense. So he might have another one of these 8, 9, 10-point games, and then it's just a little bit easier to buy him. But he also might get in the end zone just because that secondary is really bad. So if they get in scoring position, maybe for all we know, Lamar Miller has one of these 60 yards and 2 touchdown games, and then nope, there goes buying him.
Yeah. Well, shoot, I'd take it. I'd take the touchdowns at this point. But yeah. Another thing with Lamar Miller is that his offensive line has been a little bit banged up. Getting healthier, should be fully healthy this week or next week. So if all the starters are there on the offensive line, I think he'll be more effective. I think that's all there really is to say about Lamar Miller. It's worth checking in on. It might not be realistic at this point. 3 weeks in is still a little bit early to bail on your first-round draft pick, second-round draft pick.
The owner's probably holding out a little bit longer.
Because he hasn't been bad enough to where they're panicking.
Yeah.
Because they're probably thinking the same thing, looking at a stat line okay, he's put up 10 points every week, and he hasn't scored a touchdown. He'll be fine, that type of thing. But, I mean, what would you give up to get Lamar Miller? Would you give up something super valuable?
I mean, I think what you're doing with Lamar Miller if you're buying him, because you're not buying him that low. You're buying him as a low-end RB1, and you think he's going to bounce back to a top 3 guy. So, I mean,
Would you do Freeman and Coleman for Lamar Miller?
Yeah, I was thinking about that one. I think I might, and I don't think that would be that hard to do if that person's running back depth is kind of worrisome behind Lamar Miller.
Yeah. Hey,
I might try to get him to kick in another cheaper piece, but yeah, I think I'd probably do that.
Okay. Who else could you possibly? What about you have LeGarrette Blount. You want to package him with somebody else to get Lamar Miller.
Oh, that's interesting.
You package LeGarrette Blount with somebody who's usable in the wide receiver position. Okay, let's just throw out Michael Crabtree. LeGarrette Blount and Michael Crabtree for Lamar Miller. You're taking that trade, right?
I'm the LeGarrette Blount owner.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'm doing that.
Yeah. Definitely.
I don't think they would take that only because Crabtree, despite producing pretty well these first few weeks, he still gets treated like he's nobody.
Yeah.
So you probably wouldn't be able to pull that off.
What about LeGarrette Blount and Larry Fitzgerald?
That's a little bit closer. I think I'd do that, yeah. Because, Fitz is someone you want to sell at some point. Maybe not as soon as this week, but in the upcoming weeks, you're going to want to sell Fitz, and you're going to try to sell LeGarrette Blount anyway. I think I'd probably do that, yeah.
All right. Le'Veon Bell for Lamar Miller.
Nah, I'm going to stick with Bell for now.
You're I'm good. I'm good on that one.
Although, look, I'm not saying sell Bell. Sell Bell. I'm not saying sell Bell because he's probably going to be a top 3 running back. But right now, his value is actually at its peak because people are already talking about him like he's the number 1 running back, and he hasn't played at all this year. He's already getting Le'Veon Bell, number 1 back. And it's possible, not likely, but possible. We see more D'Angelo mixed in because he's coming off a knee injury. Maybe the Steelers oh man, we kind of have been running Le'Veon a little too much into the ground. Let's mix in D-Will a little bit. And, maybe instead of a top 3 running back, he's just a run-of-the-mill RB1, which is still great. But I'm not saying sell Bell. But, if someone approaches you and is willing to pay you, top dollar for him, I'd listen, depending on the rest of my team.
Would you take David Johnson?
If they were 1-for-1 David Johnson for Le'Veon Bell? I think I'd do it, yeah, because we've seen it with David Johnson. He's done it. He's the guy in Arizona. He's game script proof. He seems to have one of these video game runs every game. Yeah, I think I'd have David Johnson.
Fair enough. I'd probably make that trade too.
Yeah.
I don't know. I want to see Lev Bell play because the thing is we've seen it with David Johnson this year, yes, but we've also seen D'Angelo Williams put up like 2 ridiculous games. Yeah, he had a down week against Philadelphia, but the way he was being used before that Philadelphia game, and you mentioned that Pittsburgh, they kind of have these dud games every once in a while.
Yeah.
I still think Lev Bell, if he's in that game against Philly, he probably puts up a decent stat line.
Oh, probably.
I think, I mean, he's better than D'Angelo Williams. There's no argument there. The offense really is conducive for a running back 1, essentially. We've seen it with D'Angelo Williams. I think Lev Bell comes back and he is, I would say top 3 the rest of the way. I think you are right, though. I mean, D'Angelo Williams is not going to just disappear.
Yeah.
He will enter the game. I was reading a Roto World blurb about them using them both in the same backfield. Which means that maybe Lev Bell will see more passing work. I don't know. Either way, he'll be used. He'll probably get 20 to 30 touches somewhere in that range, 25, 30. I mean, he'll be heavily utilized.
25, 30%, you mean?
20,
yeah. 20 to 30 touches? Jesus, he's the guy.
Well, I'm talking about Lev Bell.
Oh, Lev Bell. I thought you were talking about
Lev
D-Will.
Bell is going to get those. No. D-Will will probably get like 5 to 10 touches a game.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds realistic.
Probably if you're a Lev Bell owner, you're hoping it's closer to 5. You don't want D'Angelo Williams touching the ball 10 times if you're a Lev Bell owner.
It's not great for him. I mean, yeah, we're not saying sell Bell, but, if someone approaches you and is like, let me buy Le'Veon Bell, he's not untradeable, like there's a price where he is like
nobody is untradeable
except for David Johnson, apparently
for David Johnson. DJ. All right, let's move on. Let's move away from the elite guys.
Yeah, let's get into the trenches a little bit. The cheaper guys that you like, these elite guys you're probably gonna have trouble landing, but one of these cheaper guys you got a good shot at.
Yeah, maybe we should just cut this out and make it our own segment, like the more realistic buys. Right now, I'm just going to throw out Kevin White.
Yeah.
The Chicago Football Bears.
The Football Bears.
The Bears. Kevin White is, it's been an interesting narrative surrounding Kevin White. In the preseason, it was like, oh my gosh, he's this freakish talent. Now people realize why he was in the same conversation as Amari Cooper. Like, which one of these is going to be the first wide receiver off the board? It was Cooper. Kevin White wasn't drafted that much behind Amari. Then he missed his entire rookie year. So this, for all intents and purposes, is his rookie year.
Yeah.
He had to kind of adjust to the NFL in the preseason. Wasn't that impressive. Okay. The first couple weeks wasn't that impressive. I mean, he's still learning, his route tree, essentially.
Yeah.
He's still learning how to run down the sideline, effectively use the sideline because he's this outside receiver. But in his week 3 game against Dallas, he was targeted 14 times.
That's absurd.
That's a lot of targets. 14 targets. He didn't score. I mean, he didn't have a huge stat line either, but the usage is encouraging, especially if you consider that Alshon's banged up.
Yeah.
He has Brandon. He has Brian Hoyer throwing to him right now.
Prolific.
Prolific Hoyer. But, there's always that narrative around the backup quarterback and the wide receiver 2.
Yeah.
Oftentimes he finds his comfort zone in the wide receiver 2. We saw this with Jordan Matthews his rookie year in Philadelphia. We might see this with Kevin White this year, moving on from this point. And I think because he hasn't had that explosive week, that people are straight just giving up on Kevin White.
Yeah, he might be on the wire.
He might be a waiver wire pickup, honestly.
Yeah.
So what do you think about Kevin White?
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on buying him. He's probably more of like a second half guy than, he probably needs at least another month before he really develops. But the reason we're saying buy now is because he gets the Lions this week. And that secondary is looking just awful. Just like, they're not looking good. So it's possible Kevin White sees another, double-digit target game and actually puts together something good, even if it's in garbage time. If he gets a touchdown and still ends up with like 60 to 80 yards, then all of a sudden, he's not cheap anymore because his name has a lot of hype behind it.
The Kevin White hype train.
Yeah, so this might be the lowest his value is all year. So that's kind of why it's buying now. So this is probably someone you're taking off the end of your bench to get for him or to trade for him. So what would you give to get Kevin White?
To get Kevin White, well, I think the narrative is really easy to spin because Chicago's offense looks terrible. They're just not a good team at this point. Yeah. So you're basically trading for a wide receiver 2 in a terrible offense. His value shouldn't be that high, especially in a redraft league. In a keeper or dynasty league, I think Kevin White is probably going to be hard to trade for because he still has that potential. But in a redraft league, I think you should be able to get him for fairly cheap. I mean, if you have guys on the end of your bench that have put up okay numbers in the recent weeks, like let's just say Michael Thomas for the New Orleans Saints, he just put up a great week. Somebody we've talked about a lot is John Brown. We mentioned him earlier in this show. We're going to talk about him again because we're really invested in John Brown. So John Brown suffered from a concussion in the preseason, lost his entire preseason. Yes, he played in the 4th preseason game. I think he saw 2 series, but basically didn't have an off-season workout program because of his concussion. Week 1, underwhelming. Week 2, underwhelming. People started to give up on John Brown. Like, okay, there are too many mouths to feed in that Arizona offense. He's just not going to establish himself. Well, week 3, promising. Before week 3, there was actually an article that came out that was talking about how John Brown, who fully admitted he was not close to being up to speed yet, that he was getting himself back into game shape and he didn't feel explosive like he normally does, but he was getting closer to that point. Well, in week 3 against Buffalo, he actually led the team in receiving yards. We mentioned this. Led the team in targets. It was an uninspiring performance from the entire offense.
Yeah.
But it was good to see John Brown get that involved, and especially when you consider Michael Floyd has been really, really bad this year.
Yeah.
Like, you can talk about John Brown being bad, but John Brown has not really been used. There's a difference. Michael Floyd has been used, and he's been bad. And he has a concussion. Now, he's been cleared for practice, I think. I don't know if he was cleared for contact, but it's looking like he's trending towards maybe being able to suit up this week. But even so, I think John Brown is going to kind of reestablish himself in that offense starting this week. I think 3 weeks now have gone by. He's probably just getting back to where he needs to be, and he will take over that wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 spot in the Arizona offense. So I like John Brown as a buy low. You can probably buy him for pretty cheap at this point.
Because he didn't explode. It wasn't a huge game. It was just the targets were promising. The yardage is enough to be like, okay, he's starting to get back into it. So he still should be pretty cheap. He still should be like a bench player you're giving for him, not someone you'd actually be using as a starter. But it might be your last week to do it. Maybe this week against the Rams, maybe this is it. Maybe this is where he finally explodes. So
it could be. Here's the trade right here.
Okay.
Golden Tate for John Brown.
Cool. That's interesting. That might be doable just off of Golden Tate's name and just be like, nah, he's going to bounce back. It's just a slow start.
I mean, Golden Tate was probably drafted before John Brown because he was supposed to be the wide receiver 1 in Detroit, their pass-heavy offense. There still is a narrative around Golden Tate being a part of that offense, but I just I've been kind of underwhelmed by his performance so far to this point of the season. I don't think Golden Tate is startable right now with the way Marvin Jones has played and the way that they're utilizing Eric Ebron, actually, and Anquan Bolden to a certain extent. Golden Tate's work has all been around the line of scrimmage. So, he might be somewhat usable in the PPR league. If you're in a standard format, then, I'm taking that trade. Golden Tate for John Brown any day of the week. I'm taking Brown.
Yeah, I think your idea is you're buying Brown as if he's priced as like a wide receiver 4. So you want some like a running back 4 or some other wide receiver in that range. Like Golden Tate's a good example. I trade Mike Wallace for John Brown too. And even though he had a slow week this last week, because the first 2 weeks might be enough to still get that done.
There's a lot of guys in that range who you could probably trade for John Brown.
Would you do Kenneth Dixon for John Brown?
No.
Yeah, I guess that.
I mean, it depends. I said no so quickly because of the fact that Kenneth Dixon could be one of these guys that ends up having a late season impact that might potentially win you a league.
Yeah, it could be
because
this year's David Johnson.
It sounds like Harbaugh is fed up with what he has right now. I mean, he's basically got nothing from Forsett or Terrence West. Buck Allen he's gone. Like, where did Buck Allen go? He's not even. Who knows if he's still on the team?
Yeah.
So Kenneth Dixon can come in and easily steal the job. I mean, it's more of a like last half of the season type of thing. You know, if I really needed a wide receiver and I was deep at running back, then I might trade Kenneth Dixon for John Brown. Yeah, but I mean, I think I'd wait. With Kenneth Dixon, somebody you want to stash. You don't want to just throw out in a trade. The likelihood is that you had Kenneth Dixon on your bench from the start of the year, or maybe you picked him up a couple of weeks ago, and he's been just sitting on your bench. So you want to make sure you get some value back for burning that bench spot for so long. I mean, yeah, I'd trade Mike Wallace for John Brown in a heartbeat. I'd trade Michael Floyd for John Brown. I'd trade the other receiver in the Arizona offense for John Brown at this point, because I think he is going to kind of insert himself back into that wide receiver 2 discussion starting this week.
You know who the perfect running back to buy John Brown with is? Orleans Darkwa, coming off of like 50 yards and a touchdown, so he had double-digit fantasy points. Farina's hurt, so you could argue that, oh man, you know, Jennings is always hurt. Darkwa's going to be the guy, but the truth is, that backfield's going to be a rotation. Bobby Rainey's there. Jennings isn't going to go away unless he has like a season-ending injury. Like, Darkwa's kind of a useless guy to have on the end of your bench, honestly. I didn't really get the hype to pick him up this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Jennings comes back and he's healthy, then he's going to be the guy. I mean, there have been talk of it being a committee, and they're even hyping up Paul Perkins again, who was a name that was popular in the offseason. Paul Perkins. But I think if Jennings comes back this week, it's not a great matchup. It's a terrible matchup, actually. But I think he'll be the lead back there. So, yeah, Darkwa for Brown.
I could see, like, if they're running back desperate, they might be like, oh, man, this guy, you know, he might have a real role. And John Brown's just sitting on my bench useless. You know, that's a possibility.
Yeah. I mean, you could probably get John Brown for really, really cheap. Yeah. I think he's only owned in, like, 65 to 70% of leagues. Yeah, so there's a chance he's on the wire as well. So if he's out there on the waiver wire, definitely pick him up. If you can trade a back end bench piece for him, do that now.
That's what it is.
Do it. Come on.
Do it. I kind of touched on this guy. We were talking about Travis Benjamin, but I want to like give him his own shout out. And that's buying low on Tyrell Williams. I was saying before, that he's out snapping Travis Benjamin. He's out targeting Travis Benjamin, and the reason you're buying him now is that he gets the Saints this week, and he should just go absolutely bananas on these kids. And it's in San Diego, which is a good sign for Rivers. His value is probably going to spike after this, and because, you know, he had a decent week 2, but a really quiet week 3, you could probably get him for pretty cheap. A similar price as John Brown, probably you could get Tyrell Williams for.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't. He had a good game 2 weeks ago, but last week it was nothing amazing. So, and he doesn't really have that name right now.
No.
People are like, Tyrell who? Like, what?
Yeah, people still think that Travis Benjamin is the guy stoking up those extra targets, but no, it's Tyrell. He just hasn't exploded like a diaper yet. He will this week.
People still think that Keenan Allen is a guy in San Diego because nobody pays attention to the Chargers. They're insignificant.
Keenan Allen's there, isn't he?
So I have to take my jabs at other AFC West teams when I can.
Sure, why not?
Sure.
It also helps that Antonio Gates seemed to be just like losing his battle with Father Time. Like, it seems like Gates is finally reaching the end of the road. So that only helps Tyrell Williams.
Sounded like you're going to say cancer or something. He's losing his battle with fantasy football cancer.
Fantasy cancer. Antonio Gates is fantasy cancer. He's dying.
Yeah, it seems like it. I mean, he is kind of, he's borderline droppable at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that's one. It kind of grinds my gears a little bit for like a brief tangent. It grinds my gears when the fantasy community gets hot about a player in the preseason, and then they clearly don't pan out, and that player just kind of gets brushed aside like they were never talked about. Antonio Gates was a pretty like hot late tight end to take. Like, oh man, you can get him like the 9th round, and He's got Rivers there, and they got that connection. He's going to go for the touchdown record. Like, Gates was, like, really popular. And now it's clear that that's probably not going to happen. And you'll never hear anyone say Antonio Gates' name anywhere on any podcast or on Twitter. He's dead to everyone.
Other than his injury news. Yeah. Well, I mean, we were kind of into him too, but I mean, he didn't pan out. So
yeah, I was in on him a little bit until I got more in on Dwayne Allen, who also hasn't panned out. So that's great.
Jack Doyle, baby.
Jack Doyle.
Fire up for Jack Doyle's.
Tight end 1, Jack Doyle. All right, let's move on from that. One guy I want to throw out briefly. Okay. It's kind of a similar analysis we've been talking about. Fat Eddie Lacy.
Okay.
It's not that I love him as a player. He still seems to be, Starks isn't going away, so he's not really getting that huge workload. But the yardage came back last week, and the touchdowns will come as it looks like the Packers are finally starting to figure it out, at least at home anyway. Jordy's back all the way, which helps that entire offense. That was kind of the narrative through the first 2 weeks of like, oh man, Jordy came back, but the offense didn't get better. They must be ruined. Well, Jordy wasn't really himself the first couple of weeks. So now that he's like getting up to speed, we might see the offense start clicking a little bit more. And they also played the Vikings week 2, who are looking like this elite, terrifying defense. So
yes,
I'm kind of buying that the Packers are actually back and they're going to be fine. So Lacy is like, and it's an interesting time to buy him because he's on his bye week. So whoever has him is probably fed up to even have to like keep him on their bench. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of an underwhelming start of the season for Lacy. He was a popular bounce back candidate because he had a terrible year last year, and then he, CrossFit. Well, no, it was P90X, right? The P90X
that didn't
diet.
work out. He's still fat.
Yeah, he's still fat. Yeah, so he looked a lot better against Detroit. Now it's Detroit, right? They don't really have the best run defense.
Nah.
But like you said, he's on his bye week. Somebody is going to have to fill that spot. So now might be the time to make a move. And you're going to have to give someone back in return that they can start in that RB spot, most likely. But it's the time you can send like a lower tier running back plus maybe a wide receiver package for Eddie Lacy. If you can afford to burn a couple position players on Eddie Lacy and then sit him on your bench this week. And maybe endure a bad week 5 when he goes against New York, who has a surprisingly good run defense right now.
Yeah, that's one of the issues is he might be a better buy next week, so it's a little preemptive, but, again, maybe the Packers just torch him and he falls into the end zone a couple times. That's kind of the worry with waiting too long on the buys.
Yeah.
He's the perfect, sell Latavius Murray like we were saying. He's awful. Get rid of him. And, pick up an Eddie Lacy. I don't know if I do that one. Latavius or Eddie Lacy, probably not.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's probably a lateral move in the end. They might end up around the same spot.
Yeah.
Latavius Murray, he's on a good offense. Eddie Lacy's theoretically on a good offense. But, I mean, his schedule does soften up a little bit. Week 6, Lacy gets the Cowboys. Week 7, he gets the Bears.
Woo.
The Bears. Week 8, he gets the Falcons. Tasty. Week 9, he gets... who does he get in Week 9? Oh, the Colts. Yeah, so he's got a really, really soft schedule after New York.
Yeah.
So if you can go out and make an offer for him and you're not breaking the bank, I might actually do Latavius for Lacy.
Yeah, just because the schedule's nice. And if you're going to have a guy that's kind of needs his offense to be... Because at this point, Latavius's workload is... so small, he needs the Raiders to be winning for it to matter. It's not like he's Lamar Miller grinding out so many yards on so many carries that it doesn't really matter what's going on with the rest of the Texans. So yeah, it's a little bit of a lateral move, but I guess slightly higher upside with Lacy, just attached to that offense. Or like, we're saying hold LeGarrette Blount one more week, but I do LeGarrette Blount for Eddie Lacy right now.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
do it. Sign me up. They're basically the same guy.
They're the same guy. Yeah. Eddie Lacy's like LeGarrette Blount plus.
Yeah, except when Tom Brady comes back, LeGarrette Blount's gonna kind of fade away.
Yeah, that's the problem with Blount is once Brady's back, Blount's gonna go back to being like a situational guy and just awful to predict.
Or maybe he won't.
If that's the case, then don't sell him.
That's been 100% of the narrative so far from the fantasy world, but the fantasy world also thought that Matt Forte wasn't going to be anything this year.
That's true.
So
Yeah, that's
maybe LeGarrette Blount. Like
Yeah.
everyone is on the whole. As soon as Tom Brady comes back, LeGarrette Blount's just not going to be a factor.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. I mean, who else do they have in the running game?
James White.
James White.
Well, who do they
Lewis?
play? Okay, so week 5 when Brady's back, they play Cleveland. Actually, that might be a Blunt game.
Yeah, maybe. Who's to say they're not up by 20 points and they just start feeding Blount? I mean, they're not going to want, these players that are kind of dinged up a little bit like Gronk to really overexert themselves unless they're 100% healthy.
Yeah.
So why not, if they get up early against Cleveland, why not just run Blount into the ground? Have him put up 20, 30 points.
Yeah, Blunt's definitely a hold, at least till then, maybe even another week. Because if he has a good week with Brady, man, then you can really sell him high. Then you can really be like, oh, man, look, Brady's back and it's the same thing. And then you can, really go for it.
Yeah. Or maybe he's just an RB1.
I refuse to believe that, but maybe. I can't live in a world where LeGarrette Blount is like legitimately an RB1. I can't do that.
I will quit fantasy if LeGarrette Blount is an RB1.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a good spot to stop?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Find us on Twitter, @bench-ff. Here it is. And on Facebook, yep, that's above you. Like, subscribe, comment on YouTube.
Do it all.
Yeah. Thanks for
You're
the
getting
support.
good at that whole spiel.
Yeah, it turns out I'm able to remember a couple sentences. It's surprising. It's surprising for everyone involved, especially
I'm
me.
impressed.
All right, we will be back soon with more content. Yeah. See you kids on the flippy floppy.
Flippy floppies.